So, hello. Today I'm going to talk about the next big project on our channel, and that is we are going to play Dark Sun. Now, what I'm holding in my hand is the print-on-demand version of the first edition of the Dark Sun setting, which came out in 1991. And it is now available on Drive-Through RPG, and you can get this lovely book. Downside, of course, is that all of the maps have been split down in the middle to make them fit on pages. So instead of, like delivering them on one page, they've just cut them up. But if you get the PDF, you can also basically then turn them into images and then just upload them to Legend Keeper, for example, or a VVT to have maps there. This setting came out in 1991 for AD&D second edition. And I remember walking through my local department store in Munich, and I saw the box set with this very interesting and very gripping image of this creature with those two pickaxe-like weapons and the sun or the moon actually probably in the background and snarling, because that's the only part of the picture that you see. The picture in itself is a lot larger. There are a lot more different people in that picture, but this is the image that was on the box set. And I remember finding this super attractive, and I really wanted to play this. Unfortunately, back then I didn't have a group. So fast forward to 2025, where I have had an established group since 2019, and we're now ready to move on once we finished Curse of Strahd to a different endeavor. And I've decided to run Dark Sun. And of course, Dark Sun, as it's written in here, is based on AD&D second edition. You need the player's handbook, you need probably the Dungeon Master's Guide of second edition AD&D, and you also need the Psionics Complete Psionics Handbook, because this setting relies on psionics. And I know that psionics are very controversial in D&D. I've never really understood why until recently, when I heard somebody mention that the reason why people disliked psionics was that it sounded like it was something from a sci-fi movie, which I'm fine with. If this is the perception that people have, that psionics is too sci-fi to fit into a fantasy setting, I'm fine with that. I have a similar gripe with people introducing dinosaurs to high fantasy, where I'm like, or even low fantasy, where I'm like, no, that doesn't work for me. I don't want dinosaurs in there. Interestingly enough, I don't have any problems with dragons, but dinosaurs are different. And I can't tell you why. It's just a gripe of mine. And so if somebody says, I don't want psionics because it's too sci-fi, that's fine too. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about with regard to the setting. So first of all, the setting, like I said, came out in 1991 at a time when TSR had gone through a lot of struggles financially. Bad decisions had been made. Gary Gygax left the company, and I'm not going to even go into the reasons why. If you are really interested in hearing a more comprehensive take on the whole Gary Gygax story and how it's been distorted as well, you might want to check out the When We Were Wizards podcast on Spotify, which is a really interesting podcast that explains a lot of things about TSR. But at that moment in time, this was still TSR. It was still 9 years, I believe, before Wizards bought them. And it had never been the only role-playing game in town, but definitely the biggest one. I mean, there had also been other fantasy role-playing games, Tunnels and Trolls, and definitely in Germany, Midgard and Das Schwarze Auge, the Dark Eye, which always outsold D&D at any given moment in time, really, in the 80s and 90s. and also 70s, actually. And then, of course, there was RuneQuest, but there were also completely different genres as well. There was, of course, The Call of Cthulhu by Chaosium, but also sci-fi themed games, and also Gothic games, because the first edition of Vampire the Masquerade came out in 1991. So, and of course, D&D had its own Gothic setting, namely Ravenloft, and the box set came out in the early 90s as well. I want to say 1992. So, but most of the gaming happened in Faerun and Greyhawk. So these were the two big settings at the time for fantasy role-playing. And of course, Faerun is different from Greyhawk. Greyhawk is a lot more medieval in its take on things, and possibly even a lot more feudal with its outlook than Faerun, but still they're both high fantasy. But at the time, people were also happy to experiment. So the idea was to create something that was really different from what was there. And also way back when, there was a lot less going on with focus groups and know your audience and stuff like that, because although there had been a shift from the gamer creators running the company several years prior to 1991, it wasn't like it was only run by business people, and wacky and out of the box creational or creative ideas were not considered important. That was not the case at all. And so they came up with a couple of things. They also produced the Ravenloft box set, Domains of Dread, and so on and so forth. But they also produced Dark Sun. And if you really want to know more about how Dark Sun came to be, its history, you also hear from some of the creators, I would really like you to go to athos.org or look for Dark Sun podcast, and also go to the darksunatheist.org website, where you can find so much material, maps, you can find fan-made stuff, you can find a 5e conversion, and so on and so forth. So that's really your place to go for all things Dark Sun. And no, I'm not affiliated with them, and I'm not getting royalties for anything. But essentially, it was decided to create this completely new setting, and it was going to be so different that it was not even accessible through the normal planes walking capabilities. You know, Ravenloft can be accessed from Faerun. It's part of the, if you like, planes that can be accessed and part of the multiverse, whereas Dark Sun isn't. You cannot actually get to the Dark Sun setting out of Faerun. There is no connection. So it is very, very separate, even from an in-game storytelling structure. And so essentially, when they came up with the idea of creating this, they wanted to create a completely different setting than Faerun. And in the beginning, it was supposed to be called World at War, or World of Wars, something like that, because they felt it was a world that was continuously at war. There had been this great climate apocalypse, and the whole planet had been turned into this wasteland. And the reason was magic, because magic in this plane of existence meant you basically take your magical powers from living creatures. And if you're a low-level caster, then you take it from plant life, and you can basically lay waste to large stretches of land to cast your spells. But if you're a high-level spell caster, you can also take the energy from mammals and from animals and from humans, of course, and all humanoid species. And of course, doing either of these things is super evil. And also it means they destroyed their own planet. So at the time of this box set, in-game time, magic has been outlawed. There are sorcerer kings that rule different city-states. So in that, it's reminiscent of places like the city-states in South America, the city-states in the Near East. And each of the city-states also has kind of like a real world, if you like, template that they are hearkening back to. So you've got a city-state that is based on India, on the Mughals there. Then you've got a city-state that's based on like Tikal, and then you've got a city-state that's definitely based off of one of the ones in Assyria, and so on and so forth, including ziggurats and all of this. So basically, they are run by these sorcerer kings who base their wealth, but also are completely dependent upon slave labor, because since there is hardly any water, in order to grow anything, you need a lot of irrigation, which is very labor intensive. And of course, you have to have somebody to work the fields. And how you do this most easily without having to pay is by employing slaves, and employing in inverted commas. So the world is harsh. It's all about survival. If you're outside of a city-state, you are in a wasteland, at least in the base set. And somebody pointed out, well, the landmass that is described in the base set is basically the size of Colorado. There has to be more. And yes, more was added later. But in the base set, in the first box, it's really a country that is as large as Colorado, and it's very unforgiving when you're out there. It's blistering heat. There are some oases that will give you life, but you know, if you are caught in the middle of nowhere in a sandstorm, you might just as well start praying. The problem is there are no gods to pray to, so yeah, count your blessings if you manage to get some water. And this is really what this is about. It's about survival, and this idea of survival is also baked into the mechanics. So for example, if you suffer from dehydration, your alignment will change to evil, for example. And that means that you will try anything, including killing your party members, just to get their water. Because obviously, while drinking blood may be very vampiric, the human body contains quite a lot of water. It's around 5 liters of blood, which you can ingest and which will sustain you for a while. And if you happen to be a woman, then you contain a lot more water still. So if you have a human body and you just basically start ingesting them, you will also get their water. And if this reminds you of Dune, yes, it does remind you of Dune, because they also talk about how then everything is distilled back into water, and how every dead body will then be turned into water. All of the water will be extracted, because that's what you need to survive. And everybody needs to get the water from a dead fellow tribes person, because otherwise everybody else will be dying. And so this is how they are trying to also make sure that people understand this is not just about how many miles can we cover in a day and do we have any encounters on the road. It's also about, as soon as you start moving in the heat, you're going to start dehydrating. If you don't have water, you can hold out for a good while, maybe 1 day, maybe 2 days, but then everything will go downhill from there. To really make it clear to people, this is not a walk in the park. And so this is one way in which they're trying to basically bring the message home that it's about survival. And if it is between your personal survival, the choice between your personal survival and death, but your personal survival meaning you have to harm someone else, it's going to be very hard to fight that. And also, that's why everybody else is out there to get you. I mean, this place has been likened to Australia. Every single plant, every single creature is out there just to kill you, not because they hate you, but because they want your water. Makes perfect sense. So that's the first big theme. And the second big theme, in my opinion, is freedom. Because most people in this world either live in squalor and try to get by as artisans and kind of like live a free life, but in poverty, or be enslaved and also maybe live in poverty or be enslaved and live quite a good life because you happen to have a very benevolent slave master. And of course, those of you who have read the Prison Pentad will know that Agis, for example, is one such slave owner, and he basically has this kind of change of heart where he was like, okay, you would rather be free and live in squalor than be a slave in my estate where you basically live a really good life. You have enough water, you have enough food, you have work, but you are not overworked. There is nobody whipping you. And the slave says, yes, I would, because then I would still be my own master. And this is also something that this setting deals with, because the question can be raised, if you are just getting by day, and you're just a hairbreadth away from giving into your most basest instincts in order to survive, not to kill your fellow men because you are starving, or more importantly, you're thirsting. Are you really free? What does it mean to be free? And in 2025, that's a question that we should all be asking ourselves. What does it mean to be free? And so it's a very topical setting as well. And the struggle, when you also look at the modules or when you read the Prison Pentad, is the struggle for freedom, both individual freedom, but also collective freedom. It's not just freedom from something, from slavery, but also from starvation, from thirst, from being persecuted, but also freedom to make my own choice. Yes, I would rather go out into the desert and try and find another group of people that I can live with and live in squalor and live in abject poverty, but be my own decision maker. So that's a very, very interesting and very moral question set that's being asked in this game, and that your group can answer in any way they choose. So, like I said, there are differences in the way magic is used, and this is also shown in the way magic users can level up. If you choose to suck all of the energy out of the world around you and lay waste to it, and if you do this, you're defiling, and if you defile, the area you've defiled will be impossible to be used for growing anything, for giving any life for at least a year. Or if you're going to be a preserver, which means you only take a little bit of energy and you also give some energy back as you're casting, which is described in a weird way. And I have to say, I honestly didn't buy this, and I'm not really happy about this, because how does that even work? So why would anyone then defile? With the exception that if you're a defiler, you gain experience much more quickly and you gain levels much more quickly and you become more powerful much more quickly. But you have to be a really evil character to do this. So, and you can, in theory, play a defiler. I would have understood if they had said, okay, preservers only have access to a very limited spell set, more like druidic magic, and defilers can do your fireball and everything. And a preserver can do this as well. But as soon as they start doing this and start defiling, their alignment changes to evil and they will become defilers, which is part of the mechanic. But the way it's described and the way magic is used by both preservers and defilers with regard to the spell set, to me, doesn't work, which is why I also said we're not going to use magic, because it simply doesn't work. We are going to use psionics. With regard to the psionics part, you can play a psionicist, or every other character that isn't a psionicist gets one wild talent. And there's a list of wild talents, wild psionic talents in the book, in the complete psionicist's handbook. And basically how you're supposed to do it, you're supposed to roll on a table, and then the player gets to choose for their character, which makes sense. because it's very much in keeping with the old school way of doing things, where you roll up stuff and you roll on tables, and a lot of stuff is governed by chance. And I was thinking about this. However, the problem is that psionics are governed by one of three attributes: wisdom, intelligence, or constitution. Now, if you happen to be a low con character, and you roll for a wild talent, and you end up with a wild talent that requires you to roll on constitution, and usually you have negative modifiers to that roll as well, and it can get even worse if you're trying to affect another being, because then it gets more and more difficult. You may end up with a wild talent that you will never be able to use. And so it's like, okay, we're not going to do this. I have basically whittled down the available psionic talents, and the players will be able to choose one. And then I may or may not, as we progress through the game, assign one more from my own choosing. With regard to the actual system that we're going to use, we're not going to use second edition, simply because D&D, because only I have the books. And I'm like, yeah, well, nobody needs to buy the books, because it's a good system. I actually quite like it. But we're too old for this shit at this stage. We're not going to learn another complex system, because it's a nice system, but it is complex. So we're going to use Through Sunken Lands, which I've featured a couple of times on my channel. It is I don't want to say spiritual successor, but spiritual sibling of Beyond the Wall. And it's OSR. And it comes with playbooks. And so I've taken a couple of playbooks, because everybody in my game will be playing a human being. And I'm going to talk about the races in Dark Sun after this. But everybody's going to play a human being. And I've taken some of the playbooks that are available, and I've made a couple myself. Well, I made the Cunning Alchemist. I took that one and revamped it a little. And so I've got two rogue playbooks. I've got two warrior type playbooks. I've got one druid elementalist playbook, because there are elementalists in Dark Sun. And so that also basically means you're doing a lot less of the defiling, preserving problem, which I think doesn't work, at least in my opinion. I find it really, like I said, difficult to justify. And then, of course, we have the Alchemist, and that again works completely differently. So they also have spells, and I've already got a player who wants to play this Alchemist, but they were kind of gonna skirt around this preservation thing. I'll see how I put this in, because the characters are not from there. They're going to end up there, because we're going to take the Through Sunken Lands premise. They come from the Great City in the Sunken Lands, and then they are transported to Aethys. And the reason why I'm also doing this is Through Sunken Lands basically is a lot about world building as a group. And I want to keep it that way to a certain degree. We are going to use, or I'm going to use, the Dark Sun setting. There's going to be the city of Tyr, and there's going to be the city of Uruk, and so on and so forth. But I also want the players to be able to, create their own world, and also to learn about the world as they go along, and also to see where people want to go, what people find interesting, but also to kind of gauge together what kind of themes they want to explore. The big ones will always be there, but the small ones, what are they looking for? That kind of thing. And it's easier if you do this if the player characters are in awe of what they're seeing. They are learning about the world as they go along. So we've got enough playbooks to go around, and people can choose their wild talent, and everybody plays a human being. Which brings me to the question of what races are there? Well, when they first wanted to create Dark Sun, they wanted to create completely new races. They wanted to move away from the standard elf, dwarf, halfling, human set of character races. They wanted to do something different. However, that was a bridge too far for management. They were like, no, it has to be like this. I mean, I will talk about the fact that there's only one dragon in the setting. It's called Dungeons and Dragons. There are no dragons. What? How is that possible? So they put in one dragon. And so you have humans, you have dwarves, you have elves, you have halflings, but they are very different from your human, dwarves, elves, halflings that you are familiar with. All humans have some form of mutation, which is more cosmetic than anything. They may have very big ears or very pointy ears, or maybe look somehow different, a little bit off, which is due to radiation, whatnot. Elves are very different. First of all, they are not very long-lived. They die after about 100 years, which is only slightly longer lived than an average human. They don't have this high elven culture, holier than thou. They are actually quite cunning and also really big cheats that try to get one over on you when you're doing business with them. They are very, very tall, 7 foot and taller, very thin, and they are long distance runners. And that's what they do. They run through the desert. And if you can't keep up, if you're an older elf that can't make it, they will just dump you in the desert. And they also have really weird mating rituals where they basically go and kidnap their mate against their will. And then, well, I don't know if you even want to call it marry them. Basically force them into a relationship with you. And they're all round quite nasty. There are half-elves, and these are really outcasts from both societies, because humans and elves don't really get on that well, because humans don't trust elves, because elves can't be trusted. And for the elves, a half-elf is a half-caste that can't keep up because they can't run as quickly and not for as long a time as is required. So they will just leave them behind. So those half-elves are really poor souls. They're really poor sods. They basically have one character trait ingrained in them, and that's resilience. Not resilience. It's self-reliance. And basically what this means in gaming terms is if you have a half-elf in your party, when you set up the campfire for the evening and basically huddle up next to each other to keep each other safe, this guy will go and create their own fire and will sit by themselves because they are self-reliant. They will not associate with you. They will do everything to prove that they can be their own person, like a one-man army. Then we've got the dwarves, which have no culture whatsoever. Their whole cultural background has been wiped off the face of the earth. So there is no dwarven community as such. And each dwarf has a purpose, something that they need to fulfill before they die. And if they don't, they will come back as banshees and will haunt the place. So all they do is they try to pursue this one goal that they have and bring it to fruition, fulfill it, and then hopefully die immediately after. Because once they have no goal anymore, they have to, or once they've succeeded at solving whatever it is that they have set themselves as a goal, they have to find a new one. So imagine you have been pursuing this one goal for 120 years. You finally achieve it. Are you going to find another goal that you can achieve in the possibly 20 to 30 years that you still have, if all goes well, because this is atheist, so you might be dead tomorrow, or might you just kill yourself in order to ensure that you're not returning as a banshee? And apparently some dwarves, once they have fulfilled this goal, will take their own lives simply because they don't want to come back as banshees. Very different take. Very interesting concept as well. Then you've got the halflings. Forget about the Shire. Forget about Bilbo Baggins. They do have breakfast, second breakfast, 11sies, lunch, dinner, supper, you name it. But they eat sentient creatures, and they eat them while they are alive. Yep, they don't eat other halflings. They're not cannibals, but they revere nature, the forest, because yes, there is a forest. It gets introduced in the second edition. that's beyond the ringing mountains, where they live in a lush subtropical forest. It reminded me a lot of the forest that I saw in New Zealand, the descriptions of these. And they will eat anything that is not a plant, because they revere plants too much. So they eat meat, flesh, whatever. And it has to be a sentient creature. So they will eat humans. They will eat tricrine. They will eat elves. They will eat sentient spiders, which you can come across when you read the Prism Pentad. They are really nice giant spiders that are really lovely, and they make nice music. And there's one scene where this halfling just basically breaks open the breastplate of the chitin hull of this spider and takes out the eggs while the spider is still alive and clearly in pain. So yeah, that's the kind of creature you're dealing with here. Halflings are not your normal lovely halflings that you basically, want to be invited to dinner with, because you might be dinner. Then we've got the tricrine, which are basically a mix between giant cicada and praying mantis, and they like eating elves, and they do. They're a playable race, and they're insects, giant insects. They don't talk. They work, and they work together in a hive mind, and they will converse with you telepathically. So they're all psionists. So basically, a lot of creatures, including plants, are psionists and have psionics. So very different world. Then we have the dwarves, the half-dwarves, because there are half-dwarves. They're called mules or mulls or mulls, depending on how you want to pronounce it. These are human dwarven hybrids that have been bred because of their physical strength and resilience, because they are as tall as humans, but they have the physical, sturdy, muscular build of a dwarf. They usually don't have any body hair. They are also sterile. They can't procreate. And you will find them as both gladiators, but also as very expensive, very strong slaves. Usually their slave masters really take very good care of them, because producing a mule is very expensive. They're a very interesting race, but also, of course, they're the product of a genetic experiment or breeding program. So again, and they know this. Each mule, it says in the book, knows that they are the last of their line. Their line ends with them. And usually they don't have parents, because usually the mother dies because the baby that they are giving birth to is too big. So it's usually it rips its way out of them, and they usually die. So they are alone. They have no one except the slave master who brings them up. And then, of course, you've got your humans. Like I said, they are mainly humans. The only difference is that they may have some kind of physical alteration due to radiation, whatnot. And that's actually it. Those are the playable character races that you have. So humans, elves, dwarves, moles. Oh yeah, I forgot the half giants. Moles, tricrine, and of course you've got the half giants. So this is also a race that doesn't exist. It's a cross between a giant and a human being, and they are quite tall, a lot taller than elves, but they are not as tall as giants. And they are described as, first of all, they are really, of course, strong, but they're also not really intelligent. They're not stupid, but they are more like the child that's been bullied once too many times, and it just wants to be with people and wants to be your friend. And if you happen to be an evil person, it'll also be evil. So they will also be evil. But if you're a good person, then they will be good. So they're not, their alignment changes with the alignment of the group that they're in. So a lot of them are used as guards, and it's just their job. So they're not evil aligned. They're just, they like to be told what to do, and they will do their duty. And if it's a duty that requires bodily strength, then that's a really good duty for them. Don't ask them to think a lot. And they like using their club when they fight. They're also gladiators. So that's essentially the fauna of Aethys. Then there are lots of monsters. There are very few mammals beyond the humanoids. It's a world of spiders, insects, and reptiles, cacti, birds, dinosaur-like creatures, even the, if you like, the animals that people keep as beasts of burden are quite often huge, really huge reptiles or insects. There is something called a cank, which is essentially a really, really large ant that people can ride. Mechalots are huge creatures that are like, I want to say lizards. Well, kind of like lizard type, dinosaur type, very flat dinosaurs that can pull weights. You basically yoke them to really, really large carts. And essentially, that's the world that you're in. So it is very, very different. Now, the big question is, what about the dragons? Because it's Dungeons and Dragons. Well, first of all, there isn't that many dungeons there either. And there is one dragon. His name is Boris. And I'm not kidding you. His name is Boris. Now, dragons there look very different from the dragons you might be used to, because they are essentially very tall humanoid-looking dragons. They do have wings, but they look very, very different. They look like a really, really large Mothman kind of dragon thing. And there's one, and his name is Boris. And he lives in the Tyr Valley, which is where the base game is set. And you don't really see him, sometimes in the distance, but he's very dangerous. He's a dragon. And there is another way that you can create more dragons. And that is if one of the sorcerer kings decides to go all out and go through a very, very laborious and very painful process and reach apotheosis, and they turn themselves into a dragon. They have to be a 20th level spellcaster, 20th level psionicist. So, go figure. They have been doing some multiclassing there and have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of years. And then when they're finally there, they need to create as much energy as they possibly can. And they will draw this energy from the land. But most importantly, they will draw it from sentient creatures that live in their city-state, killing them all in the process, using them as human batteries or humanoid batteries to fuel this ritual. The ritual will drive them insane, but then, hey, they will be a dragon. And they will try and wrest the crown from Boris, which nobody really wants to see or be a part of. So, yeah. So that's what we're going to be playing. We're going to be playing Dark Sun together with Through Sunken Lands. And yeah, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, like, subscribe, hit the bell button, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.